Okay, functionalist theory. So structural functionalism says that the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts, and it is a consensus theory that supports the status quo and the establishment in society. The structures are things like institutions, organizations, and groups. The big five social institutions are usually listed as politics, economics, education, family, religion. This is structural strain theory that comes from Robert Merton in the 1950s. This goes for individuals and society, and individuals in society that are either changing it or not. So, if a person uses society's means to try to reach society's ends, that's called conformity. So, for example, if one of the ends of our society is getting rich or financial prosperity, a person, could go to college or get a job to try to do those things. If a person tries to use the means but not the ends, that is considered normal or expected in society, that's called ritualism. So just going to work every day but not expecting that anything will ever actually happen, or going to college and doing that without the expectation of riches or prosperity. If a person does not use the socially acceptable normal means, but does try to reach the normal socially expected ends, that is called innovation. That can create social change. That can also be called crime. For example, a person who sells drugs to try to become rich or prosperous. A person can also not use society's means or ends. So that is called retreatism. They can choose not to seek wealth. They can choose not to have a job. There is a fifth category called rebellion, where a person or a society chooses new means and new ends altogether. Again, exogenous means from without. Endogenous means from within. So structural functionalists see social change as exogenous. Conflict theorists, which we will get to in a moment, see social change as endogenous. This is from Tolkut Parsons, a structural functionalist theorist from the 1950s. So slides 5, 6, and 7 give us this. So maintenance, for example, if a family continues to provide emotional and financial support to family members, but the family does not change in any way, it is simply maintained. Structural differentiation, if the family has children or a new child or child, would be an example of that. Adaptive upgrading. So, for example, if adult children create a new household, maybe they get married or have children of their own, or if one of them does that, that would be an example of that. Structural change. So, I suppose if one of the adult children chose to remain childless or unmarried, that would be an example of structural change. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about these categories and these definitions here on these three slides because, for example, the family used to be the central institution for politics, economics, education, religion, health, defense, and entertainment. However, well, because the family was the workplace, now we have a workplace that is separate from the family. The family used to provide all education informally, now we have formal educational institutions. The family used to provision for all health and illness, now we have hospitals and doctors and nurses and clinics, and so on and so forth. Um, the family used to be the main institution providing defense. Now we have the military. Storytelling and mythology used to be important in the family. Now we have movies, books, TV shows, and so on and so forth. So there are these other institutions that have specialized in the division of labor away from the family, or even for that matter, politics used to be a matter of bloodlines and family ties and royalty and nobility and things like that. But now we have separate political institutions. So my point is, I'm not sure if that would be adaptive upgrading or structural change. Has anything changed or has it not changed? But I just give it as an example that's kind of interesting maybe. So I teach the intergenerational course, and we talk about with individuals and societies, right? Things like trajectories, um, a life course or a path that one or a society is on, for example, democracy. There are transitions on the same trajectory without the trajectory changing. There are, for example, the abolition movement, the suffrage movement against slavery and for women's rights to vote would be on that democratic trajectory in our nation's history. But there are other kinds of events that can be turning points that change the trajectory. So, for example, the 2024 election could be an event which is a turning point rather than a transition, which takes our democratic trajectory and puts it on an authoritarian trajectory. Just as an example. Um, so yeah, that I bring that up here. That relates to this slide. Um, again, with modernization and dependency theory. So modernization theory is associated with functionalism. Dependency theory is associated with conflict theory. So again, should other countries be like the United States or not, especially middle and low income countries? And especially during the Cold War, when there was Russia and communism and capitalism in the United States, and countries in Africa and the Americas and Southeast Asia had to choose. Of course, today, with international relations and foreign policy in flux, I am not sure if those two theories even, what they will continue to mean, but they may continue to mean something. So, anyway, there it is. And that is usually constituted as a choice between liberalism, capitalism, formal education, nuclear family, and secularism, or democracy, socialism, informal education, extended kinship networks, and religiosity, or another path altogether that countries could take as they go from underdeveloped to developing to a developed or high income nation. Okay, so this is the mass society, which is large, complex, with a division of labor that contrasts with the traditional society, which is small, simple, and does not have a division of labor. This is associated with functionalism. The class society, I will get to in a moment, that is associated with capitalism and social class and with the conflict theory. Okay, so anomie is Durkheim's idea. It's related to functionalism. It's about being anonymous in a mass society, like one does not matter or one does not know what to do. Again, this is related to Marx's idea of alienation and conformity in a class society, which is related to conflict theory, I will get to in a moment. Disenchantment is Weber's idea, Max Weber's idea of uniformity in a mass society, which is also kind of a related idea. So, conflict theory is about how groups compete for scarce resources in society. Unlike Marxism, it could be about economic class or things like race and gender or anything else. That is one change from Marxism to conflict theory. Another change is that group conflict could be cultural and symbolic, as well as about material resources and money. Um, so it could be about respect and dignity, status and prestige, as well as money, power, and status. And those fields of human endeavor all have their own collateral or forms of currency, which may or may not be exchangeable to each other. Power maybe can be exchanged for money and vice versa in certain fields, but maybe not. Marxist thinkers are utopian. They think history has an end and it will be a good one. Conflict theorists are anti-utopian. They do not think history has an end, whether or not it would be good or not. Anyway. So, an example of this might be the LGBTQ plus movement, which is about removing a stigma and improving the status of gay and lesbian persons and bisexual and transgender persons. So they are combating transphobia, homophobia, the gay rights movement, the trans rights movement would be related to this or an example of this. So that could be cultural. However, it could also be material because, same-sex marriage, for example, allows things like Social Security survivor benefits or inheritance rights, joint adoption, hospital visitation, things that are material. So, but anyway, the point is it does not have to just be about economic class. It does not have to just be about money, although it could be related to those things too. Okay. Well, okay, so critical race theory and feminism are influenced by Marxism, as is the German Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, which came to the United States during World War II to universities like Princeton and UC Santa Barbara. I suppose the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, his theory of fields and insurgents and incumbents in fields like art or science would also um, be in this category. So he might take impressionist and expressionist artists as an example, or maybe um, um, classical physics versus relativistic physics is example of insurgents and incumbents. Um, and again, this is a focus not just on social class, but on social control. So not specific, but general. Um, and this is the idea that social norms and expected social behavior support whatever the dominant group is or dominant groups are. So it could be about capitalism or patriarchy or white supremacy or all of those things or none of those things. It's broad rather than in depth. And let's see. So people like C. Wright Mills and his power elite would be here. Michel Foucault and his ideas of postmodernism would be here, as would Max Weber's ideas about organizational sociology. So, for example, schools, hospitals, prisons, workplaces are all places of social control because there are formal and informal punishments and rewards that are given for normal, expected social behavior that'll, in a way, directly or indirectly, support the status quo and the establishment. So this is, again, conflict theory. This has a distinction here from, or distinguishes itself here from Marxism in this way. Well, and I mean, there are forms of soft power and hard power. If a person behaves abnormally or unexpectedly, they could be medicalized and called sick, or they could be criminalized and called a criminal, put in prison or a hospital. Um, This relates to the idea that we live in an organizational society, a society of organizations and people, and that people spend their lives from the cradle to the grave in organizations. We receive a birth certificate and a death certificate. We spend half our lives in school, half our lives at work. And the thing about organizations is they're efficient but not free. We are free only in the time we spend away from organizations, not in the time we spend in organizations, because organizations have rules and regulations, whereas our free time we do not. So are we free or are we not free? That is an idea that is present here. One way you could think of it like a computer program, right? An organization is like a computer. You program the instructions, which would be the organization, and then you run the instructions, or the program, which would be like the people. So are we just algorithms? So, for example, this relates to techno-fascism or techno-feudalism or digital fascism, whatever. The idea that Elon Musk can control the government digitally because records and files are not kept in filing cabinets anymore. They are kept, or warehouses, they are kept on computers. And that he's sort of a puppet master and we are all just algorithms. He does not view us as human beings and can sort of just control us that way. So those are all just kind of ideas about social control that are influenced by Marxism but not Marxist. Okay. Okay, so slides 20, 21, 22, and 23 are all about this. So there are latent interest groups, and there are manifest interest groups. Latent ones have a shared interest, but do not realize it, but they potentially could. Manifest ones have a shared interest and have realized it and have actualized that potential by realizing it. So, for example, I would suggest that rich people are a manifest interest group and poor people are a latent interest group in the United States because rich people practice class warfare, but poor people and middle class and working class people typically do not. There is not much class consciousness among the poor, but only among the rich today. Um, I would suggest that that whites and men are also manifest groups, and that women and people of color are to a degree manifest groups. So there are various levels of organization um, and shared realization that are present in those groups. Let's see. There are also conflict groups, which are manifest groups which are engaging in conflict through either regulated nonviolent means or unregulated violent means. So they could be using socially expected normal means or socially unexpected abnormal means. Again, I would suggest as an example that the American political right today is a conflict group that is engaged in unregulated violence. It uses other means, though, as well. That is the exception to the rule rather than the rule, but it is present, I would suggest. Whereas the American political left today is not a conflict group. It is not even a manifest group. So, to the degree that it does anything, it is still using regulated nonviolent means. So there is no resistance and no organization. And to the degree that there is isolated examples of those things, they're still normal politics. They're not practicing revolutionary politics. So anyway. And again, it can be pluralized or superimposed. So superimposed is when all issues are connected. Pluralized is when all issues are not connected. So again, the left does not have any conflict groups or manifest groups, and there is not one coalition. Women, people of color, and the working class are not united. However, the upper class men and Caucasians are united. They do have a conflict group and a manifest group, and they have built a cross-class coalition. So, for example, well, should I give an example of that? There were white women that voted for Donald Trump because they would benefit as white people, not as women. There were men of color who voted for Donald Trump. They will benefit from his policies, they will benefit from his policies as men, but not as people of color. There was a cross-class coalition that was built there that connected all of these issues about race, class, and gender. Anyway, slide 24. Class society, so it's like mass society, except it just sees largeness, complexity, and division of labor as a tool of capitalism. So be aware of that distinction. So we've entered what is called late-stage capitalism, monopoly capitalism, in which military, finance, advertising, and globalization are important. So the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the 2008 Great Recession, and continuing outsourcing and automation of jobs would be examples of that. Interpretive theory is concerned with how actors and individuals and organizations interpret themselves and the things and people around them and their motivations and behavior. So this is a micro theory. It's subjectivist, and it is about agency, whereas conflict and functional theory were macro, objectivist, and about structure. Okay, so I'm going to use Erving Goffman's idea of the definition of the situation here, which is that We communicate verbally and non-verbally our definition of the situation, and so do others, and that we combine those and negotiate social situations in such a way that we come to a mutual understanding, although it is dynamic, not static. It is always changing. And this is based on certain social and cultural scripts and roles. We give a performance unless we have to improvise, which is when a social situation or interaction ritual breaks down, or it is not tenable anymore. This is reciprocal. We can experience embarrassment and awkwardness when we have to improvise our roles instead of using the roles given to us by a given performance. We do this to facilitate smooth and efficient social interactions, with the hope that other people will do that as well. So yeah, so that's that. 28. I mentioned Goffman, the Canadian sociologist who died in the 1980s. He wrote a book called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Self-presentation it's not a slideshow about ourselves. It's the way we tell other people about ourselves through the way we dress and act and speak. We engage in impression management, trying to control the impressions that other people have of us. He uses this idea of dramaturgy, that life is like a drama. There are certain scenes and settings and costumes and props that we all use, and that there can be front and backstage, where we give a performance before an audience of people we do not know, whereas the backstage is where we prepare to give the performance. And that is, we do not have an audience there. We have just people that we know well in our backstage, or just us. This also relates to Thomas Horton Cooley, the looking glass self. We see ourselves the way other people see us. The Thomas theory, right? Perception is reality. Things which are perceived as real will become real or acted upon as real, right? There's also George Herbert Mead and the me in the eye, the way other people see me, the way I see myself. So those are all kind of ideas that are in this category. As well as the social construction of reality. So society influences individuals who influence society, and so on and so forth. Postmodernism here suggests, though, that there are so many cultures and subcultures that people from other countries, or people from different countries, or even the same countries, do not live in the same reality or understand each other. I guess this is the idea of culture shock between countries, or the culture wars, and the bubbles people live in within countries. 31, 32, 33 are all kind of related. Okay, so in psychology, the way they do social psychology is by looking at cognition and behavior and how that influences thoughts, feelings, and behavior, sort of the hardware of the person. In sociological social psychology, we look at culture, and what kind of culture or subcultural scripts are present or not, or being followed or not, and how that influences thoughts, feelings, and behavior, which is more like software of the person, I guess you could say. So there is, expected normal behavior, which dominant and subordinate groups and individuals can follow or not. This can be dichotomized as elites and masses. So an example of this would be Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat to a white man on a segregated bus. So she's an individual person. But this also relates to the civil rights movement and segregation. There were powerful people like MLK who supported her and the NAACP, and there were, relatively powerless individuals like the police who arrested her and supporters of segregation like Alabama Governor George Wallace. So there are people who are powerful and not powerful, and groups that are powerful and not powerful that make society essentially every day, collectively and individually through what they do. Okay. Frames. Issue framing is an important part of social movements. So these are so frames have three parts: the us, the them, and the issue. Frames can be dominant or subordinate in society, and they can be a frame or a counter frame. So, for example, so one frame would be this: the us is rich, whites, and men; the them is the poor, people of color, and women; and the issue is that the rich white men say they are the victims, and the offenders are the poor, people of color, and women. And they are taking a cultural approach to this issue, and it's dominant, and that's that would be the frame. The other side of that would be the us would be the poor, people of color, women. The them would be rich people, white people, and men. The issue would be they would say poor, people of color, and women are the victims, and the offenders are rich white people and men, and they would take more of an economic approach, and that would be a counter frame or counter theme or narrative, and that would be in our society today, I would say, the subordinate frame. It's not the dominant frame that is taking power today. And that's all important to social movement activism and strategy and tactics. Okay, almost there. I already mentioned all this stuff actually. So 37, 38, 39. Be aware, it's not just about this cycle between agency and structure, individuals and society cooperating. There's also conflict. They are not only in a cycle of mutual influence, they are in a cycle of pushing and pulling forward and backward on each other as well. So and that is all. I will try to keep the lectures briefer than this in the future.